Tonight's workshop is organized into 6 sections. An overview of the city's water system, Chromium-6 regulatory background and compliance timeline, Chromium-6 feasibility study and alternatives, rate setting and financial impacts, capital improvement planning, funding strategy, and grant opportunities. Again, after each section, we'll pause for a brief question and answer period before moving on to the next topic. Once all presentations have concluded, we'll open the floor for broader questions and discussions. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Will Barrera, who will begin an overview of Patterson's water system.
So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Will Barrera. I'm the Deputy Director of Operations and Maintenance attached to Utilities. So I get the fun part of this presentation. I get to talk about a little bit of the operation and maintenance and what the water distribution's functions actually are, and as operators, what it is that we do daily. So go ahead, Maria. So the purpose of the distribution system is to provide safe drinking water to the customers of the community, business, and residents. We currently have 6 full-time operators and 1 chief water operator. We have 3 operators that are certified at a grade 2 distribution, which there are 5 different levels, 5 being the highest. We have 3 distribution 4 operators, and actually we have 1 T5, but he's not in water. Last year, we produced 1.5 billion gallons of water in 2025. This includes water to all businesses, residential, water loss, and storage. We are 100% a groundwater supply city. So what that means is all the water that we distribute throughout the city comes from the ground up into the distribution system, storage tanks, straight to the businesses and residential properties. We have 7 potable wells currently, which we have another well that's currently in construction, hopefully to be online in December. The 7 potable wells, potable meaning drinking water quality standards. 3 non-potable wells, which those are intended use for watering our parks and any other things that we don't want to use our potable water on. We have 107 miles of potable water mains throughout the city of Patterson. That's equivalent from, and I actually Googled this, so this is why I know it, from here to Monterey is exactly 107 miles. We have 9 miles of non-potable water mains, 956 fire hydrants, 3 storage facilities, which we have a 4th currently in construction, hopefully to be online in December as well, 756 backflows, 7,800 water meters, and this includes residential and business. So a typical day includes exercising valves. We monitor our SCADA system, which shows us all of the well sites, the pumps, and what everything's doing at every site, as well as system pressures, which is very, very important, obviously. We exercise and operate valves. We perform rereads on the meters to make sure they're functioning correctly and regular readings, so we're charging correctly. We maintain all the wells, booster pump stations, the storage tanks. We maintain chlorine residuals throughout the distribution system, which, again, the only treatment that we currently perform is chlorination. We respond to customer service requests. So if anybody's having water quality issues, you got low pressure, water smells bad, any of those requests that we get, that's what we respond to. Water service connections, which is very important. Turn offs and turn on, like you see from this picture here. Anybody hits a hydrant or something like that, we respond to getting that water isolated so we don't waste it. Inspecting the distribution system. Preventative maintenance on pumps. Recording data at all well sites, which is very important to get the right numbers to the state. And preparing for any on-call or emergency situations. A non-typical day includes water main breaks, which I'm sure many of you have seen throughout the city. Service line leaks. So two different aspects. You have the main line that flows through the city, which we have 107 miles of, and then every service line that feeds the businesses or the homes, that's considered a service line. So two different aspects. And then any water quality concerns. So you guys have seen us throughout town. This is why we flush hydrants, try to flush those lines out. So to prevent any water quality concerns, as well as, again, making sure that our chlorine levels are correct. So water quality sampling requirements. This one's important as well. So we meet the state and federal regulations. So we perform weekly back-T testing. We have 25 sampling points throughout the city. So it's not like we're taking every sample from one area. We do it all throughout the entire city. We have our monthly source monitoring. So out of all of our well sites, we take a sample there as well. Additional source monitoring, same thing at 7 wells. Lead and copper monitoring, which we do every 3 years. So this is for any lead that's detected, because in the old solder and the old copper lines, there were lead back then. But obviously now we've moved away from that. So we just got to make sure that there's none of these lines that are left in the ground that contain any of these contaminants. So UCMR5. UCMR5 is an important one. It's an unregulated contaminant. This is a requirement by the federal government. The EPA requires us to test for any contaminants that are not yet regulated. So basically, they just want to make sure that any levels, that anything that's not regulated, they don't need to provide any information to us to make sure that everything is safe and the water quality is in good shape.
Okay, so now we're going to go through the regulatory background and the compliance timeline. But before, I'm going to go through a few slides just to kind of give you what their acronyms and definitions of what you're going to be seeing out throughout the presentation, or at least you're going to be hearing about it. So the first one is acre feet per year. This is usually how we, it's a unit of volume that we usually use with a lot of our water resource reporting. Each acre foot is equivalent to 325,000 gallons of water. Another one that you're going to be hearing a lot tonight is centralized treatment. So this is a treatment process where water from multiple sources, like your 7 wells, it is all collected and it's treated at one centralized location before it actually goes out to the public. GPM, this is a flow rate measurement that is indicating the number of gallons of water that's moving through the system for each minute. Lower aquifer, this is a deeper groundwater zone, and in the next slide, there's an actual diagram that shows a lower and an upper, but it typically contains older water. The water quality is better than the upper aquifer, but it's often through confined conditions, and it's much difficult to, it's a lot harder to recharge. RO, you will be hearing this one also. It is reverse osmosis. It's a purification process that pretty much involves taking everything out of the water by forcing water through a semi-permeable membrane or filter. Surface water treatment plant. So this is it's a facility designed to treat water from rivers, lakes, reservoirs, the DMC, the aqueduct. It goes through this plant to be able to treat the water so it meets the Title 22 or drinking water standards. TDS, this is a measurement of dissolved minerals, salts, and other substances that you might find in the water that indicate overall water quality. Upper aquifer, and you can see from the diagram, so the city sits on 2 aquifers. You have the lower aquifer, which is, typically contains good drinking water, and then you have the upper aquifer that we also use, but it's only for non-potable purposes, such as irrigation or construction use. So a lot of the construction that you see occurring in the city, it's almost all of it is using non-potable water. So pretty much we're saving the better quality water for potable purposes. WBA, you will see this because it's one of the it's a technology that we are going to be recommending. This is a process that uses resin that removes certain ions such as nitrates and chromium through an ion exchange reaction, and Riker can probably elaborate a little bit more on that technology. And then lastly, wellhead treatment. So this is a treatment that's applied directly at individual well sites. So the 7 potable wells that we're talking about, this is where the treatment would occur at each individual well site. And what it does, it treats it on site before the water actually goes through the main distribution system. So this is a slide I wanted to include because I want everyone to kind of not be familiar. I mean, there's a lot to it, but all the different steps that the water board takes into setting an MCL. So the first step is to establish a public health goal. Scientists determine that the amount of contaminant that people can be exposed over a lifetime without significant risk. This is what they call a public health goal. So the public health goal for chromium-6 is 0.02 parts per billion. The MCL is 10 parts per billion, right? But sometimes these public health goals are very difficult to achieve, and actually they're very difficult to analyze. There's only a few labs within California that can analyze concentration levels that low. Oh, I need to slow down, huh? Oh, sorry. Okay. All right, so the second step is to evaluate drinking water data. This step includes the state will look at how often a contaminant is found in drinking water, who may be affected, and whether or not, again, labs can accurately test for it. Also, Will talked about the UCMR, the sampling that gets done or that's required by the US EPA. These are unregulated contaminants. And so just recently last year we had a sampling event for PFAS. So we tested for 32 elements of PFAS, and luckily we were non-detect for all of them. But the US EPA, they're actually using that information to be able to come up with a new regulation. And actually, the state of California recently, last year, adopted standards for a couple of elements of PFAS as well. The third step that the water board takes into setting an MCL is assessing treatment options. So the state is then going to review all these different, what they call best available technologies. They want to see if the contaminant or the constituent can actually be tested, if it can be analyzed, and whether or not can you actually remove the chromium or the nitrates or the TDS out of the water. The fourth step is to analyze cost and feasibility. So California considers the cost and the practicability of being able to monitor and treat contaminants, but still protect public health. So this was actually the reason why the first MCL was rescinded in 2017. The water board took all these steps. However, for step 4, they didn't actually follow the requirement in making sure that this, whatever treatment they were putting forth, whatever goal they were setting was actually cost effective and it was feasible. So it was rescinded for that reason alone. And then the very last step is to actually adopt the MCL, the maximum contaminant level. So what is chromium? Well, chromium is something that's naturally found in rocks, plants, animals, humans. It exists in 2 forms. You have chromium-3 that's good for you. You find that in vegetables, fruits, plants. And then you have chromium-6 that is not so good for you. But it occurs naturally in the environment. It can also be produced by industrial processes or industrial contamination. Patterson has always had a small trace amount of chromium that is naturally occurring and wasn't caused by, a utility. It wasn't caused by any industrial contamination source. Together, chromium-3 and chromium-6 makes up total chromium. And so the federal standard for total chromium is 100 parts per billion. The state standard is 50 parts per billion. And based on the last sampling event that we had, the city's average for total chromium was 21 parts per billion. So what California did, they actually took the chrom-6 part of the total chromium and they set its own standard. And so we've always been in compliance with total chromium, which again also includes chromium, chromium-6. But when they went and set its own standard, that alone put us out of compliance. So it wasn't anything that we did to alter the chemistry of the water. We didn't add anything. We didn't take anything from it. We were now just regulated by this new standard. Okay, so now we're going to go through the regulatory history of the the Chrome 6 MCL, beginning when it was first regulated in 2014. So in 2014, California established a maximum contaminant level of 10 parts per billion. At that point, water systems, including Patterson, began evaluating compliance requirements and different treatment options. In 2015, the city submitted a corrective action plan. So this plan actually identified all the different steps that the city had to take in order to come into compliance. One of those steps was to complete a feasibility study, and that feasibility study evaluated all the different technologies that were identified in the Water Board's white paper or in the MCL ruling, and then also evaluating all the associated cost. Now, in 2015, I think it was October 29, 2015, we did submit a pre-application through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Unfortunately, we were not successful because Patterson's water was naturally occurring and it wasn't contaminated by another source. In 2017, that same regulation was rescinded by the Water Board. Sacramento invalidated the Chrome 6 MCL. They determined that the state had not fully satisfied the Safe Drinking Water Act requirements during the rule development. That was at 1 step 4. Therefore, the 10 parts per billion MCL was withdrawn. And it was indicated at that time that the new MCL would be adopted within 18 to 24 months of that ruling. Unfortunately, we know now that that took almost 7 years for them to establish or draft a white paper saying this is the process that we're going to take to develop the new MCL. And the estimated MCL was going to be between the original 10 parts per billion and then the 50 parts per billion, which again is the MCL for total chromium, which again contains chromium 6. I will do better, Christina. Sorry. All right, so now we go into this kind of period where there's a lot of uncertainty. You know, what do we do? Do we move forward with treatments? Do we not move forward? In 2017, so the MCL was rescinded in 2017. We actually found out May 10th of that year that they were going to rescind the MCL. The following day, we decided, do we move forward with this pilot project? Do we not? How do we approach that? Well, staff decided, well, let's continue on. We've already developed a scope of work. Let's just get it done. So the purpose of this study was to evaluate whether or not well modifications could actually reduce chromium 6 concentrations. We installed a packer to block certain concentration levels of chromium 6. So imagine I don't know what the well depth of 7 is, maybe 450 feet. So what we did is we kind of, within the casing, we kind of capped different screens, different areas to try to see which areas provided better concentration levels. And we were successful. It was a really good project. It actually reduced the chromium by 30%. It was originally 30 to 35 parts per billion, and it brought it down to about 23 parts per billion. So everything was great all the way up until 2023. There was some repairs that we had to make at the site, and during that process, the packer became damaged, so we had to take it out. And, you know, for a variety of reasons, it was not put back in. It was too expensive, and we already had a lot of data, like I think it was more than 5 years worth of data that we can actually count on. Now, whether or not to implement this in at other locations. So once we took the packer out, the concentration levels went back to their historical levels. So it didn't go up any higher than what it was originally, but it did go back up. Now, during that time frame between 2017 and 2024, so we continued, even after we did the project and there's no MCL in place, we still continued to monitor on a quarterly basis. Also, we did a system-wide sampling event in 2022 and then again in 2023. And the purpose of that is just to kind of see, you know, are we still looking at the same concentration levels? Has anything changed within the water's chemistry? Another slide on the same period, 2017 to 2024. So why was treatment, construction for treatment, why was it deferred? Why didn't we move forward with either, the improvements from well 7, from the pilot project, or any of the stuff that was included in the feasibility study? So one, there was no enforceable chromium-6 standard that existed after 2017. Not until October 1st of 2024. So there was no, like when we're working on a feasibility study, we need to know what the MCL is going to be because we need to treat to either 70, 80% of that MCL. That MCL did not exist, so we didn't know what we had to treat to. Second, future regulatory requirements remained uncertain and could have resulted in different treatment needs. So for example, let's say they would have set the concentration levels to 25 parts per billion. Well, we would have only had maybe 2 well sites that would have been out of compliance. So we would have only had to put mitigation at both of those sites. So again, there was a lot of uncertainty during this time. It was only supposed to take 18 to 24 months. Obviously, we know that it took a lot longer than that. Also, compliance cost. So within the feasibility study, from the cheapest option, which was $65 million, to the most expensive option was $128. Because of this, we didn't quite feel comfortable, and it was a collective decision between engineering, public works, the city manager's office. Do you move forward with a $128 million project or a $65 million project when there's no MCL in place? And also, again, deferring construction avoided the potential for stranded assets. Again, it could have only been that 2 well sites would have required treatment, meaning you didn't need it at all these other additional sites. So we would call those stranded assets. You're not actually using them, but you're also having, not only did you pay for the capital cost, but you're also paying for increased operations and maintenance costs. And so in the future slides, you're actually going to see what those O&M costs are going to be. And also, the city is not alone in this, and this is not an isolated situation. It's not just happening here in Patterson. This screenshot, so this is an actual picture from DWR's Gamma site. It's a groundwater monitoring site for water quality purposes. Each one of these red dots represents either a cluster of wells or individual wells. Right now, throughout all of California, there were 964 wells that have exceeded the Chrome 6 MCL of 10 parts per billion historically. 404 wells have exceeded within the last year. And those I don't know the number of cities that have to deal with this, but we just know that we're not alone. And again, it's not an isolated situation. There's naturally occurring chromium throughout all of California. Okay, so current compliance strategy. So again, in October 1st of 2024, the MCL was reestablished by the Water Board. They went through the entire process, whether we agreed with it or not, it is what it is. We're not trying to change it now. In 2025, because well 7, we did the mitigation efforts, or the pilot project at well 7, that one actually triggered an exceedance first. But we knew, based on historical results, that all these other sites were going to trigger exceedances as well, and they did. So shortly after, the city submitted a compliance action plan. And again, just like the corrective action plan that I mentioned earlier, this one also identifies all the steps that you're going to take to come into compliance. And they also want you to include the dates, the applicable dates. So that plan was submitted May 22nd of 2025. It was approved about a little more than 6 months later on January 9th. So now we have this approved compliance plan. So technically, the city is still in compliance unless we kind of deviate from this plan or we just don't follow it at all. Then we would be in violation. Final compliance deadline, based on the projects that we included within that plan, is September of 2030. So the projects that have been completed, or the activities that have been completed to date, they include the Chrome 6 feasibility study. We've evaluated treatment technologies, configurations, different site alternatives. Again, we had done a lot of this legwork in 2015, and basically we just updated everything. We also compared wellhead and centralized treatment alternatives. as well as some new kind of, there's a lot of technologies that have evolved and different treatment methods that have evolved since 2014. So rather than the cost getting more expensive, it's actually getting a little bit cheaper. But we analyze whether wellhead, centralized treatment alternatives, and also one of the new additions, and Reichard's going to go into this too, but this feasibility study wasn't just about water quality. It wasn't just trying to figure out what is the best treatment technology or method for treating chromium-6, nitrates, TDS, whatever we have in the water. It is not simply for that. It was also to comply with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So this is like one of the biggest water laws in the history of California, or at least in the last 100 years. And so the whole purpose of that plan is for the city to be sustainable within the next 20 years. So by 2040, city can no longer be in overdraft. We have to, mitigate draft not only here, but within the entire subbasin. So this study also looked at, the pumping reduction requirements that the city has to, that the city's required to follow. Milestones and city council actions. So the next steps, basically, and Riker will also talk about next steps, but the next thing that's due is a basis of design report. So again, we've completed the feasibility study. We have a recommendation to make to city council. Now we want to work on the basis of design report. So this pretty much establishes the design criteria, any assumptions, and the selected treatment approach for the project. Shortly after, we'll go into preliminary design. May, November of 2027, so next year. Hopefully we can be at the 60% design phase. And then by the end of 2027, have final design and put it out for bidding. We hope to start construction by February of 2028. And then again, project completion by September of 2030.
All right, apologies. Thank you. As I was saying, I work for, we're in Kern. We do a lot of municipal water business throughout the state. I've been an engineer for 20 years, and I know how important this project is. I've been working with Maria on it for a long time, and I'm excited to tell you about the feasibility study because it was a great project, and I look forward to continuing working here. So this is a feasibility study update. As Mira mentioned, the city had done previous feasibility studies. We did this in 2025. And the real purpose of the study, was to evaluate treatment and siting alternatives for the chromium-6 compliance. Also take a look at TDS and nitrate management. We want to see what we can do to blend the groundwater with treated surface water, overall water quality, of course, future reliability. So not only the feasibility study addresses two main things. It's not just the immediate Chrom-6 treatment. It's also kind of a long-term compliance with the groundwater sustainability plan for the Delta Mendota Canal. When we looked at several alternatives in the feasibility study, and we narrowed it down to these three for the study. Alternative one, which involved using reverse osmosis to treat groundwater. Alternative two, where we have centralized treatment using California aqueduct water with the interim Chrom-6 treatment. And alternative three is very similar to alternative two, but there would be a different source for surface water. It would come from local irrigation districts. Meanwhile, we would treat the Chrom-6 in the near term. We also kind of evaluated, so for these interim solutions to treat the Chrom-6, we wanted to evaluate wellhead treatment, which is, I think Maria mentioned, is when you put a treatment system right at each groundwater well, and a centralized treatment where you would pump the water from those wells to a centralized treatment facility, and then distribute it from there. Can you all hear me on the mic okay? Seems like it's going on and off. Okay, thanks. And this gets to the two reasons for the feasibility study. It's helpful to think of the project in phases 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is we want to treat the water coming out of the groundwater wells. And we're looking at treating wells 7, 8, 9, 11, 14, with 5 optional. Again, we're talking about potentially individual wellhead or a centralized treatment option. The feasibility study looked at DDWs, that's Department of Drinking Water. They're the ones who set the regulations for water in the state. Best available technologies, and these are technologies that are proven and approved by DDW to treat Chrome 6. One of those is called RCF, SBA and WBA. That's a strong-based anion exchange and weak-based anion exchange, and then RO, reverse osmosis. And so we would implement those as soon as possible, immediately, to get that, get the water treated as soon as possible. But those would also be long-term solutions that can always be used to treat Chrome 6 moving forward. And then in phase 2, again, this stresses the mandates from the Groundwater Sustainability Plan for the Delta-Mendota Subbasin. So we looked at secondary water sources aside from groundwater. What can we do? We can bring in surface water. And then, alternative 2 and 3 kind of discuss, 2 different sources for that surface water. And then in which case you would need a surface water treatment plant, which would be centralized. This is just a quick look at the city and where some of the wells are. You can see the non-potable wells on the left, with the drinking wells clustered more on the eastern side of the city. Towards the south, there's a city-owned parcel that could be used for a centralized treatment facility. And just for reference, the water quality control facility, that's for wastewater, is up in the top right. So I'll talk about the alternatives in the feasibility study. Alternative 1 would be centralized treatment of lower and upper aquifer wells with reverse osmosis. This would require a centralized facility at that location to the south at Orange and First. We would connect all city wells, current lower aquifer wells, to that centralized facility. We would use reverse osmosis because that's the only thing that treats everything. It treats Chrome 6, nitrates, TDS, other constituents. And that's important because of the mandate from Sigma, where we have to reduce the amount of lower aquifer water that is being pumped. So this option would involve 6 new upper aquifer wells to satisfy the future demands. And as Maria mentioned, there's nitrates and TDS and other things in the upper aquifer. We would also need to find something to do with that. So when you have reverse osmosis, it creates a high concentrate, high salinity brine. You need to do something with that. And so this would also require conveying that to the water quality control facility. And it's estimated that this alternative could possibly be implemented by 2030. And that has a total capital cost of $150 million. Here's kind of what it looks like. At least this is what the conveyance pipeline would look like. So we have the central facility towards the bottom of the image, and then the wells are shown, and then we would have to build a conveyance water pipeline to get all the water from those wells to that centralized facility. Some pros to this, it treats multiple water quality issues with one system. It helps meet the groundwater pumping limits while still maintaining, the water supply. You'd have a reliable local source of water without relying on any imported surface water. And it could be implemented faster than some of the surface water alternatives. Some cons to this approach are, you need to construct 6 new upper aquifer wells, a lot of pipelines, and the centralized RO facility, which is expensive. RO is expensive. There's that brine that I mentioned. We have to do something with that. It needs to be disposed of safely. You're continuing to rely only on groundwater sources, so you're not diversifying your water sources, and it's the most expensive to build and operate. Alternative 2, we would do centralized surface water treatment with the interim Chrome 6 treatment, and that could be, you can see on the bottom there, that could be at the wellhead or centralized, like I mentioned. This would maximize the lower aquifer wells. This is what DWR would allow the city of Patterson to take from the lower aquifer. It would connect, eventually, you would connect all the city wells to the centralized facility, and that would be phase 2 for the surface water treatment plant. because eventually you don't want to put it all in one spot. And this assumes, this alternative assumes that Patterson would be able to receive a water allocation from a California aqueduct supplier. And that would also require a minimum of 5-mile transmission pipeline to get from the California aqueduct to the location of the centralized facility. Similar kind of image here, this would be a picture of the pipeline infrastructure to get the wells to the centralized facility. And again, that's phase 2. It could be phase 2, but if we do individualized wellhead treatment, we don't need to build those pipelines right away because we can just treat at the well and put right into the distribution system. Some pros to alternative 2, reduces your reliance on groundwater, helps you meet your SGMA requirements, does not require any new upper aquifer wells, provides a reliable surface water source with consistent water quality, that's the California aqueduct, and creates opportunities for regional partnerships and shared infrastructure. Some cons, it does require a new surface water treatment plant and pipeline infrastructure. The source surface water is more expensive than that for alternative 3, which I'll talk about in just a minute. There's a long implementation timeline for the surface water treatment plant, and so that's why there's kind of 2 phases. You have to do the interim Chrome 6 treatment before that surface water treatment plant can be brought online. And it's dependent on securing your long-term water supply and the funding for that. So again, alternative 3, very similar to alternative 2, but it has a different surface water source. So we're still maximizing the use of the lower aquifer wells up to what DWR would allow. We'd be connecting the city wells to eventually to a new transmission, to the centralized facility with new transmission pipelines. This assumes Patterson will receive water allocation from local irrigation districts, not the California aqueduct. And then we would do the interim Chrome 6 treatment with the wellhead or centralized. Now, this has the longest implementation timeline, largely due to what DDW requires for bringing on a new source of drinking water in the state. There's testing that has to be done, and then you have to design and build a surface water treatment plant. It's slightly longer than for alternative 2 because the California aqueduct has higher quality water, and there's more testing on it. Some pros, again, very similar to alternative 2, but here we can see that it's a lower cost for the surface water. And it still creates, some opportunities for regional partnerships. And again, some similar negatives, requires new treatment and conveyance infrastructure. Source water quality may vary, requiring more robust treatment, but it's all very doable. Again, the longest implementation timeline for the surface water part, and it's dependent on securing long-term agreements with the local irrigation districts. I want to look at, show some costs that we did here. So this was part of the feasibility study back in 2025. Now these are broken up into capital costs and then what we call NPV, net present value, O&M costs, and life cycle costs. And net present value basically compares the current upfront costs against the value of all expected future costs to adjust for the fact that a dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow. So we were referring to some of the capital costs before in the previous slides. That's how much, it's essentially construction capital costs. It's all the construction costs and all the soft costs that get you there. And then the NPV and the life cycle costs, that's over the life of the infrastructure. So here you can see that RO is the most expensive. Alternative 2 is more expensive than alternative 3, which you can see. And then you can see that the wellhead treatment at the time we did this study we have being a lot more expensive than the centralized treatment. So we completed that feasibility study in 2025, and since then, Woodard & Kern's been working with the city to kind of really try to understand their needs and hone in on which of these alternatives are the most feasible and the best alternatives. So the city narrowed the choices to alternatives 2 and 3, and we worked with them to talk more about the individual wellhead treatment options. So at a feasibility study, it's a fairly high-level study as far as design goes. right? So there's not much design. It's mostly a planning document. But the way that you can refine costs as a design engineer is to kind of add more project definition and go a little bit farther in terms of understanding what your project's really going to look like. So we increased the project detail for the wellhead and centralized options to meet the city's needs. And what you can see here is that the wellhead, if you recall from the previous slide, the wellhead was a lot more expensive than the centralized treatment. Through increasing the project detail and definition, what we realized and working with vendors and understanding everything in a higher level of detail is that the wellhead is actually very, very similar to the centralized option in terms of cost. So the feasibility study kind of conclusion is that this alternative 3 with the interim wellhead treatment, not the centralized option, is the selection. And this provides the city with near-term, affordable, and flexible treatment for Chrome 6. It utilizes the city's existing infrastructure for the foreseeable future while diversifying the city's water sources long-term. That's phase 2 for the surface water. Allows for potential regional partnerships on the surface water treatment plant. It's the least expensive alternative. It defers pipeline infrastructure costs to phase 2. What I mean by that is if we did the centralized option, we'd have to build the pipelines from the wells to the centralized facilities immediately. And so those costs are not needed right now. And it does not commit Patterson to a centralized treatment location at this time. This is just kind of an example of what the treatment option would look like. As I mentioned, we looked at different treatment options, best available technologies to treat Chrome 6. We went the wheat-based anion exchange. It's very favorable in terms of cost, and it also doesn't create a waste stream, which is something that the other treatment options did. RO, for example, right? We talked about that. And so that also saves on cost. You don't have to have a waste stream and deal with waste in that way. What basically you do is there's a resin that goes inside these vessels, and it's switched out. And a vendor will do that for the city. This is kind of larger than we'd have at each well. The one at each well would be a couple of tanks. And then I want to talk about the costs for alternative 3, but just phase 1. So this is for the Chrome 6 treatment, none of the surface water stuff. We did a cost estimate, and we see that the estimated total capital cost is about $20.3 million for the individual wellhead WBA treatment.
So this is Michael DeGroot. Michael's with Bartle Wells, again, worked on the 2017 and the 2022 rate study.
Good evening. So I'm going to be going over kind of the financial aspect of what this Chrome 6 project means for your rates. And I first want to start with your water rates because this is the main source of funding for the water enterprise. And what you can see here on this slide is your adopted rates. So the city last conducted a study in 2022, which established 5 years of water rates. And you can see that they adopted 2% annual increases each year for 5 years. So the city's really taken a gradual approach to increasing the rates at a very low level. The water rates are comprised of 2 components. You've got a quantity rate per unit of water usage, and that's per 100 cubic feet, or CCF, and a CCF is about 748 gallons. So for the first 13 units that a customer uses in a given month, they pay the Tier 1 rate, which for this year is currently $2.97. And for any unit above the first 13 units, they pay the Tier 2 rate, which is currently $4.13 per unit. In addition to that, there's a monthly fixed service charge that varies based on the size of the customer's meter. And for a typical single-family home, they would have a 3/4 inch and below meter, and they would pay $18.17 per month. And then customers with larger meters, such as large commercial customers, would pay more depending on the size of the meter. And a typical bill would be between $50 and $60 a month for a single family home. So these are the legal requirements for increasing water rates that are applied to rates in California, also known as Proposition 218. And there's both procedural as well as substantive requirements. So on the procedural side, the city needs to mail notice of the proposed rate increases to all affected property owners, and the city must hold a public hearing prior to adopting the proposed rate increases not less than 45 days after the notices are mailed. For the substantive portion of the rates, the amount of the fee or charge levied on any customer shall not exceed the proportional cost of service attributable to that customer. So you can't have one set of customers subsidizing another. Revenues derived from the fee or charge cannot exceed the funds required to provide the service, and revenues derived from the fee or charge can only be used for the purpose for which the fee was imposed. So every dollar that you're paying in your water rates must go back to paying for water service, and the city is not allowed to make a profit on the water rates. Water rates included in the Proposition 218 notification are the maximum rates that can be charged for the next 5-year period. But if costs come in lower than anticipated, the water rates can be adjusted lower as long as the decrease is applied proportionally. So this is the cost basis for the Chrome 6 Interim WABA project. And the estimated operating costs for the 5 wells is $1.5 million per year. And this includes ongoing expenses to operate the treatment system, such as repairs and maintenance, labor, and electricity. So you can see that's $300,000 per year per well. For the equipment cost, it's $5 million total. And the equipment cost of $5 million is assumed to be recovered through a 10-year lease-to-own annual payment of $662,000 per year. So under this agreement, the city would own the equipment after the initial 10-year lease expires. And in addition, the lease agreement requires an initial media loading cost of $200,000 plus a $963,500 down payment. The estimated capital costs for the treatment systems for the 5 wells is $15 million. And the $15 million capital costs plus the upfront lease costs are projected to be funded through a bond or loan. The estimated terms are a 30-year repayment, 5% interest, and 1.5% transaction fees. So that would be a typical market rate for a bond issuance from the city. However, the city is exploring state revolving loan fund and other low interest loan options. So this shows you all the factors that we look at when we're calculating the water rates. So we start with your water customer base, and we've denominated that in terms of 3/4-inch meter equivalents, and the city of Patterson has 9,824 3/4-inch meter equivalents. The operating and maintenance costs for the first year is estimated at $1.5 million, and we escalated that by 3.5% for general cost inflation. For the customer base, we factored in 0.6% growth in the customer base per year, which is a conservative estimate of growth based on the city's projections. The capital debt service for the non-leased capital and lease upfront costs are approximately $1 million per year of level annual debt service. And that's funding $16.2 million for 30 years at 5% interest. You can see the lease to own equipment payment of $662,000 is factored in. And finally, there's a debt coverage requirement of about $500,000. And this is what lenders want to see. Your net revenues need to be at least 1.15 to 1.3 times annual debt service in order to obtain financing. So this applies to both the lease payment and the 30-year debt. So in total, the revenue requirement for the Chrome 6 project is about $3.8 million. And that equates to a monthly charge per meter equivalent of $32.21, and that would increase up to $33.34 in year 5. Something you probably heard in the presentation is that the Chrome 6 treatment wouldn't be constructed until September of 2030. So there's an opportunity here to phase in this charge over time. And about $13 to $14 of this charge is due to the operating cost. So this shows you the estimated additional Chrome 6 rate. And you can see that it varies based on the size of the meter, where larger meters pay more in proportion to the size and estimated capacity of the meter. And once again, the typical single-family home has a 3/4 inch or below meter, so they would pay $32.21, and that would gradually increase to $33.34 in year 5.
These next few slides are on our capital improvement planning. So as part of your water rates, there are different purposes or different categories of where your money goes. The water that you're paying for your water bill, where does that go? So there's O&M, there's debt service, there's reserves, regulatory compliant planning, but there's also capital improvements. So when we did the water master plan in 2018, we asked a consultant, develop, based on all our existing deficiencies, develop a CIP list that incorporates all the capital projects that the city's going to need, either based on need, existing deficiencies, or something that's going to be needed in regards to future development. So there was a plan that was identified, and there was also a cost that was associated with it. But I wanted to include a few slides of where your money has been going in regards to like the water, the money that we're collecting for water rates. So there's going to be 3 slides. The first slide is everything that's been completed since I know the planning started before, but maybe 2018. These are all projects within the city that have been completed where water rate or the enterprise fund helped pay for these. So one was a recoding of gateway storage tanks. So this is something that's needed every 10 years. We do annual inspections on our water tanks or our storage facilities. So if there's a need to kind of recode something sooner, then we kind of add it on to the CIP. But we wanted to make sure that all 3 storage tanks are included capital improvement program list. The second one is the Kinshire. There was 2 phases, Kinshire 1, phase 1 and phase 2. This is, poppy, clover, Kinshire, WM, that was a mistake, WM1B, that actually project included, it was done concurrently with some road reconstruction. So we all know what poppy looked like before and what it looks like now. So that was part of that WM1B. The next one was the retrofit and installation of 6,500 water meters. And so we also changed over from the AMR to an AMI system. What this does, it allows you to view your water use in real time, rather than waiting until the end of the month to see how much water you're using. Another benefit from the AMI project is the ability to be able to see if you have any leaks going on. They can be something very small. It depends on the alerts that you put into the system. But let's say you have your alert. Your alert is, tell me anytime that I use more than 1 gallon of water for a continuous 24-hour period. It's going to send you either a text or an email. And then you have to go and figure out, okay, where's this coming from? Is it a leaky toilet? Is it a broken irrigation line? But you have the ability in real time to be able to see that instead of waiting until the end of the month. The next one was, again, the recoding of another tank, Well 8, which is located off of Orange Avenue, but that also included cathodic protection for the site or for the tank. The next one was, and this one was done concurrently with maybe non-potable 1A. So this is where we put in a non-potable line for all the landscape that's being used at the Hammond Senior Center area. And also the construction of all the pipeline to service the new storage tank that's off of Rogers Road. These CIP projects have been either awarded, they're in construction, or they're in design. So you can see from, it is WM6A, and WM6B. So WM6A, that project is currently a design, or it's almost done. That is everything within El Circulo. So all the pipelines that are within the circle, they're due for replacement. It's just aging infrastructure. And that's all part of, the city's existing deficiency that ratepayers pay, and unfortunately, you can't pass it down to developers. WM6B is everything kind of like in the blue area. Showing up too good. Everything south of the circle. So this project also includes the road reconstruction for 9th Street, right? So you're using enterprise funds for the water portion of the project, and then you're using Measure L, or I'm not sure, another funding source for the road reconstruction. But one could have gone before the other, but there's no sense in putting in a whole new road and then you're gonna have to break it up because you have to replace the pipeline because it's just old and it's leaking. So that's kind of what we did with Poppy, the Poppy road reconstruction. We kind of waited until all the funding aligned and we were able to complete it all at the same time. And WM5 is also, that one you can kind of see now. There is a pipeline replacement on Sunset Court. There were also some other improvements that were part of that project, but there was no longer a need for that, so that got incorporated into another project, or was that a standalone? Standalone project. Okay, and then the last one was the perk ponds for recharge. So that is currently being funded by the development, but it's also in progress. Now, there are projects within your 10-year time frame. So these are the projects that we call, they're currently unfunded. So there's no money for them right now. But there's the pipeline replacements for about 4,000 linear feet of pipeline replacements on Washburn, Weber, North First Street. All the pipeline replacements in Colony Park 1 and 2 and the Brook Hollow subdivision. The replacement of 5,600 linear feet of pipeline and replacing water services at the California Palm subdivision. All the infrastructure, service lines, and water mains at the Las Palmas Mobile Estates. And then there's a couple other projects, but the two that, again, are not funded are that they're a priority are the two that are highlighted in red. And again, these projects are not currently on, they're on the CIP, but they're currently not being funded. Any questions on the CIP before I go into financial? No? Okay. So this next, this is the part where we talk about, okay, what have we done so far in regards to, trying to fund the Chrome 6 improvements. So well 6, which we hardly talk about, but I did mention a little bit earlier, that one is the one that's on standby and it has the 1, 2, 3 exceedance, but it also has Chromium 6. We did submit a pre-application on May 7th of 2025 for mitigation, and because 1, 2, 3 TCP is on the emerging contaminant list for federal EPA, they set aside a special fund, a special pot of money for these type of projects alone. We submitted the pre-application, and if we, complete, again, I talked about earlier about the general application. The pre-application just tells them what the funding needs are, but the general application is what really gets you the money. So if, right now we're working on the basis of design report, and the rest of the general package so we can get that submitted. Everything, we've already gotten word from the Water Board that up to 11.9 million of that project will be forgiven. So as of right now, that will cover whatever improvements we do for the 1, 2, 3 TCP portion of that project. The second application that was submitted was the Chrome 6 compliance project. This one I submitted it back in March of 2025, requested up to $50 million. I put that our needs were 83 at the time, but you can only request the max, which was a 50 million. Again, for Chrome 6 treatment for all the additional. This one we submitted a pre-application, but because again, we know now what we're going to be recommending to council, but unless we have a basis of design report, 60% plans, all the environmental and all the financial, only at that time can we actually submit for the full general application. But both projects, we've already been assigned a finance manager from the Department of Financial Assistance. So other funding opportunities. Hello? Does it work? Okay. So other funding opportunities, safer funding. So this is, I believe it's managed by the State Water Resources Control Board. The city is not currently eligible because, again, we are not a failing system and we're not considered a disadvantaged community. State grant funding, there's been no direct funding, but all SRF, either a clean water, drinking water SRF, those are all monitored and managed through the State Water Resources Control Board. Federal funding, again, also administered through the state, but the money's actually coming from the federal government, and that's specifically for the Well 6 mitigation project. Now, in regards to legislative requests, so we've submitted quite a few. And through different, Congress people, whether it's, I think it was Padilla, Duarte, and there's been, who else? And Adam Gray. So we have done those. One was actually selected to move forward, but if the federal government doesn't release the money, then we don't get anything. But we did submit one back in, when did I submit this one? I think it was 2023. We submitted one for Chrome 6. We did ask for the full, what we thought the improvements were going to cost back then. Unfortunately, that one was not selected to move forward for appropriations. But whenever they come, once a year, they come calling. We already have write-ups ready to go. We might have to do some adjustment based off of new activities or new efforts. But we have those ready to go, so whenever they put a call out for projects, they're ready to be submitted. So the city's primary or the overall funding strategy for Chrome 6. So obviously our primary objective is to minimize the impact to water ratepayers. Every dollar of funding secured from outside sources reduces the amount that must be recovered from water customers through water rates. So again, you have the cost of the project. Then you incorporate, you have outside funding, and then the difference, that's what actually gets plugged into your water rates. In regards to advocacy efforts, so this is kind of where I was talking earlier about joining this coalition of cities. We were successful in meeting with every one of the board members, and they did change language within the drinking water intended use plan where cities, you don't just have to be a failing system. As long as you have an exceedance, you can actually go after that money. So there was no guarantee on the $50 million request because of that language, but that sense has been changed. So we are not now eligible to be able to seek a drinking water SRF fund. Okay, funding coordination, that's been primarily our water resources staff. However, we are supported by multiple other city departments. We do have some on-call agreements with at least three other consultants to be able to work on grant applications once those solicitations come through. And in regards to like the next one that we're looking at, so this was something that was approved by voters, California voters, in November of 2024 was Prop 4. So this is where they have, they've been allocating money for specific projects, the majority having to do with water, but there's some storm water. They have slowly started releasing funding for these projects, but they haven't released anything yet in regards to drinking water funding opportunities. So that's the next one that we're kind of keeping an eye out. We have a contract with California Consulting. That's on their list. It's on our list. Our consultants are also looking out for this funding opportunity. So whenever the solicitation comes out, we're ready to submit something. Okay, I believe this is my last slide. So this little screenshot that I had in one of the other sites, the Gamma site. So this is something that you can, and the presentation has the actual URL, it's not just a link, but you can actually go on here And the little box off to the left, that's where you would filter out your information, right? And then you can actually see which not the communities, but where the wells are located that have those exceedances. I thought it'd be helpful to keep that there so you can kind of see what's being monitored and where. There's also the State Water Resources Control Board webpage. There's a lot more information regarding chromium-6. There's also a list of FAQs, but those are a little bit outdated. We did update some FAQs on everything that the city has been doing to date. Those are on that back table. And then there's a dedicated page on the city's website to chromium-6. So everything like the PowerPoint, the translations, everything is going to be on that one page, and we should have it there by tomorrow afternoon. And then this is a good one, and we also have that on our website. So this is a California Drinking Water watch page. So anything that's been sampled against the city's water system, every single sample for any constituent, any well, everything is uploaded into this database. So that's that one page at the top, and then it's going to ask either a water system number or a water system name. You can just type in the public water system number. And once you type it in, you're going to, City of Patterson's going to be the only one that's on there. Off to the left, and you can always call me and I can guide you through the program, but if you are curious, okay, what are the city's nitrate levels or TDS levels or chromium-6 levels for all the well sites, and when did the testing start? Everything that has been sampled against the city's water system is going to be in that database. So you can, and it's very, very easy to export the document and be able to filter out all the constituents. So, but again, my contact number is here. You can always call me. I can navigate you through these sites. So again, and also the contact information is there in case if you need to email myself or some staff.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and close today. Like I said, if you have questions that pop up, we do have those forms. Contact the city, contact Public Works, contact Maria, council, whoever you feel comfortable contacting. We'll do our best to answer any of the questions you have. And we understand the gravity of the responsibility we have in front of us. And we're going to take it 100% serious, and we're going to move forward together, and we're going to communicate with each other, just like tonight, more often, and we're going to get this done. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Thank you for presenters. Thank you.